On Wednesday, U.S. lawmakers rejected President Obama's bid to derail legislation allowing the victims and families of those who were killed during the September 11th, 2001 attacks to sue the government of Saudi Arabia. The White House has long argued that the bill known as the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act will open America up to similar lawsuits from foreign nations. Let's get a reaction from Congressman Steve Russell, Republican of Oklahoma. He is a retired Army officer, commanded the unit that played a key role in the capture of Saddam Hussein. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the House Committee on Government Oversight and Reform. He joins me from the Cannon Rotunda on Capitol Hill. What's your reaction? Obama's first lost veto. He lost the bill that would allow families of September 11th victims to sue Saudi Arabia. What did you make of that?
Well, I think it's something that when you see both houses of Congress with such overwhelming majorities of the voters out there, they get it. And so we, being the People's House and the Senate, we are a reflection of the nation as a whole. And this is an issue I think most Americans see pretty clear on.
The White House claims that the bill could open Americans up to reverse legislation from foreign nations.
There is a possibility that there could be attempts at that. I think 9/11 was unique in its incidents and the fact that you had of the 19 attackers that they were all from a single nationality. What this doesn't allow is to not have a day in court or to have a hearing on both sides. If there's a legitimate case, then a court will adjudicate it. But to simply eliminate any possibility of adjudication or using a court system for victims, I think most Americans thought that that was unfair.
But then we could say that the citizens of Iraq might sue the United States for our going into Iraq and killing people.
Well, again, they would have to make the legal premise for that. Just as the victim families here in the United States, they will have to make a legal case. But to do a prohibition completely without having any possibility of a day in court, I think that was something that got everyone in a bipartisan fashion saying, no, if there's a legal case, give them a chance to pursue that under the laws, and then we'll see what happens.
Now, Saudi Arabia has issued some threats to curtail official contacts, pulling billions of dollars from the United States economy, scaling back counterterrorism cooperation. How do you react to that?
Well, it's understandable, and if I were in Saudi Arabia's position, I would, expect that they would be upset because I think rightfully they can claim that they had no direct ties to terrorism. At the same time, from the United States perspective, if there's a legal case and it shows some valid inquiry and it passes muster to go to court level and have a judge hear it, then the evidence will take it in that direction. But I understand that the Saudis are upset. That's to be expected.
Congressman, the Pentagon announced today that it plans to send an additional 600 troops to Iraq, where you served, for an offense to take back Mosul. What's your reaction?
Well, we see this last bastion in Mosul with ISIS and the former Baathists that were under Saddam's rule that have largely been administrating that town in their newly rebirthed ISIS construct. I think it's a good thing that we lend the support that we can. We have been anticipating this for some time. I think the conditions are right. And my real concern, Larry, is not the military support. The military can obviously deliver a pause to the situation that we see in Iraq. I think the real question remains, what are we doing with the State Department? What are we doing with our economic strength, diplomatic effort? The military can always turn conditions, but they can't create solutions for the long term that are going to have to be political solutions. So I would hope that we would see as much of a diplomatic assault as we would see with military assistance.
You're a decorated veteran. You served in Kosovo, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Iraq. You wrote We Got 'Em, a memoir of the hunt and capture of Saddam Hussein. What would you say to the next president? What advice would you give him or her about dealing with the Middle East and all of this?
Unlike Las Vegas, where maybe what happens there supposedly stays there, in the Middle East, that's simply not the case. What happens there left unattended or not engaged in, it finds its way of spilling over the borders. And so we have to be involved economically. We have to be involved diplomatically. We have to be involved with communications and information, not just militarily. Usually when you get to the military, it's too late, and that seems to be the trend. So my advice to whoever the new president is, look, we cannot isolate ourselves from the Middle East. We have to be engaged with it. So how do we choose to do that? Through peaceful pursuits or through disastrous pursuits where it's going to be costly no matter what the outcome?
What do you see as our greatest threat?
Right now, I think our greatest threat to the United States is economic. It takes away all the options that we have. Here we've been discussing military options or diplomatic efforts. Our economy is $18 trillion in debt, Larry, and when we have that, we are rapidly deteriorating as a nation. That is a threat to national security as well. When we can't pay the bills, the president wants to cut 30,000 additional troops after 1 October and 8,000 Marines. If we see that, we're putting our nation in harm's way. We have to have options, and economic strength will give us those options. And that's true for domestic politics as well. We can't pretend that we cannot address our runaway spending. It is one of our greatest threats.
Could we have another government shutdown?
I don't see it happening before the first. I think at a minimum you would see a 3 or 4 day short-term type of solution to buy time into next week. I don't think that will happen. I think that there will be some type of continued resolution that's put forth. Personally, I have issues with that. I think that we should have gotten our work done. At a minimum, we should have gotten the defense authorization and military construction. Those were a couple of things that we had broad agreement on in both the House and Senate. I think we see a little bit of the backdrop of the presidential race and control of the Senate that seems to be influencing all of the government funding issues. But two of those, which would have accounted for over 60% of our needs and budget, could have been solved. I think we should have rolled up our sleeves, burned the midnight oil here in the last 6 weeks and got it done.
Tell us about your program called Waste Watch.
Well, we put out, in the tradition of Dr. Tom Coburn, who was a United States Senator from Oklahoma who did the Waste Book, we've continued that mantle of leadership that he had to deal with waste. This is our 5th Waste Watch that we've released. We identify $10 billion of additional waste in this. People say, okay, you're identifying these things, and that's good, but what are you doing about it? Well, already this year, working in a bipartisan fashion, the president has signed into law measures that will save $4 billion a year in taxpayer dollars. So even in Washington, D.C., $4 billion is still real money.
Steve, I thank you so much. It's always good talking to you.
Well, thank you, sir, and it's always a pleasure. And they can find the Waste Watch at russell.house.gov, and you'll see a lot of things that you wish your tax dollars weren't going towards.
russell.house.gov.
Yes, sir.
Hope you join us again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you.